All right. Thank you very much, Chelsea, for that festive background video today. And we'd like to say thank you to all of our participants for joining us today for this webinar supported by Astellas. So my name is Leanne. I am a research manager at the CDTRP, and I am here to welcome everybody to our fantastic panel who is here on camera in front of you. I just wanted to do a little brief overview of the content of today's webinar. So you may have seen it just there on the video, but we're going to reiterate it in speech. Just so that everybody knows, things that we're not going to be discussing today includes direct clinical advice or future predictions for 2021 where it comes to COVID-19. Things that we are going to talk about today, however, are things like communicating with your family members, how to mediate stress, coping mechanisms that you've developed or that you feel like you need to develop throughout this stressful event, and anything pertaining to the holiday season. So we welcome everybody to participate with us today with our panel. In order to first test our participation, we're going to show you guys a poll. So a poll is going to pop up here. Everybody should see it on their screen. And we would like to know, how did the people in attendance today hear about this webinar? So everybody has a chance to vote there, and then we can show you guys the results. This is one of the ways that we encourage our participants to participate in these webinars. So we're going to give it about 20 seconds here. There's 3 of you left. You guys can do this. All right. Excellent. So 52% on social media. So Alessandro, we're going to discuss that when we come around to you later in today's program. So ways that you can interact with us over this webinar and you can converse with our panelists as well as the people running it are, you can utilize our chat function, which is in the bottom bar of the Zoom box. Chelsea's going to say hello so that it pops up and everybody knows where it is. Into the chat. So I see some people have already been using the chat. Excellent. The other way that you can interact with our speakers is to use the Q&A box. You'll also see that at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask questions. We do encourage everybody to ask their questions and to participate on the chat throughout this event. It is a very informal situation. We want this to be conversational and everybody to be comfortable. So please feel free to discuss anything that you'd like through the chat and the Q&A. Chelsea will be monitoring the chat and we'll have the opportunity to read out questions to our panel. There's Chelsea, who's now joined us with a hat. And otherwise, throughout the entirety of the presentation, because we are in webinar format today, your microphones will be muted and your cameras will be disabled if you are a participant or an attendee, sorry. So please do use those chat functions to help us interact. All right, so we are going to kick off today's webinar by introducing you to our panel. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to actually have them introduce themselves and answer an introductory question, which is, what is it that made you interested in sitting on this panel today? And why do you feel like this webinar is important? And we are going to kick things off with Larry, because Larry has a Santa hat, so he gets to go first.
Hi, everyone. I'm a double lung recipient of 12 years ago, became involved with the CDTRP a couple of years ago as a patient family partner. I guess, how did I become involved in the panel today? First off, you say no to Leanne and Chelsea at your peril, but there's more to it at that. I'd like to hear what some other opinions are and suggestions to keep the fun in Christmas in the dire times that we're in. I'm part of a CDTRP weekly COVID-19 focus group, and no matter how down everybody is feeling at the start of the meeting, we all come away from that buoyed that we've been with friends and that we're not alone. And I'm hoping that today's participants come away from today feeling the same way.
Excellent. And Larry, I'm going to leave it up to you to pass the ball to the next person to do their introduction.
All right, I will pass over to Joanna.
Knew you were going to pick me, Larry. So I am Joanna Mitchell. My daughter Riley is 15 years old. She received a heart transplant when she was 7 months, so she will be celebrating 15 years post-transplant in January. I also have my husband and son that live in our house. We have been very involved with raising awareness of organ donation over the years. We volunteer with Trillium Gift of Life. I'm on the board of the Canadian Transplant Association Ontario board. We also are ambassadors for Sick Kids and Children's Health Foundation in London. Just making sure that we get the story out. We've also participated in the Canadian Transplant Games, or I should say Riley has, but our family's attended since she was 5 years old. So we've met a lot of different families over the years participating in the games. And that sort of brings me to, why I wanted to participate in this panel. I think that we bring a unique perspective to things because the transplant recipient in our family is the child, and we deal with some different issues than what, say, an adult transplant recipient deals with. And we have other children to consider when we're making our decisions. So I thought it was important that we could present that point of view as well today.
Excellent. And Joanna, you get to toss the ball to the next member of the panel.
I will pick Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Abbey. I'm sorry I'm muted. So I'm a psychiatrist at University Health Network, and I love this group. So I'm just really happy to be here, and we've been doing a lot of thinking amongst our group about how to try to help people with a COVID Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, New Year's Eve, whatever your holiday of choice is at this time of year.
All right, Susan, and then you get to pick who goes next.
So I'm having trouble just with my screen, so maybe you pick for me.
All right, I'm going to pick Alessandro for you then.
Thank you, Lena.
No problem.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sandra. I'm joining you from a pretty sunny day today in Edmonton, Alberta. It's actually quite warm today, which is rare this time of year. And I work here in Edmonton at the University of Alberta in the Faculty of Law at the Health Law Institute. And what I basically do there is we do a lot of media studies around all kinds of different health topics, including donation and transplantation. And I kind of lead most of the media studies, which is great for me because my whole life I've been really interested in language and media, and I'm really kind of interested in how beliefs are made and how people come to understand certain things in certain ways, and kind of the role that language plays in that. A really interesting example I can give that I think is the case of Thomas Edison. And everyone, thinks of Thomas Edison as this great inventor who had immense science knowledge, I guess, or science ability. But what people have shown is what Thomas Edison was really good at as well was writing grants and convincing people to invest in his projects. So he was able to use language in a way to get a lot of people to buy in and to keep momentum around what he did. And that is fascinating for me, just kind of how language works in that way. And so, yeah, I study social media, I study stuff with donation and transplantation, and I'm really happy to just be a part of this today and share some things that I know or I'm exploring or thinking about in relation to that.
Awesome. All right. And Laurence, last but not least.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Laurence. I am a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Studies on Human Stress in Montreal. So that's where I am talking to you from today. It's my first time being involved in any transplant organ donor activity, and I'm super glad that I've been invited for this, as there is a transplant patient in my immediate family and my uncle. So that's kind of closer to me. So yeah, in the past few months, I've been studying stress during the pandemic. We've done a couple of online studies, and a couple of things we've shown is how much pre-existing conditions matter for mental health. So when I got the invite to join you guys, it was a no-brainer for me. Of course, I was going to join both to discuss with you guys, to learn and to exchange around that topic. So nice to meet you all, and I hope you enjoy it.
All right. So as everyone can see, we have recruited a fairly varied panel today. The idea today is going to be that we're going to ask some questions to start discussion, but of course, we're always happy to take questions from our audience. So if anything happens or anyone mentions anything that you'd like to know more about, or you have a targeted question that you'd like to ask a member of our panel or the CDTRP, please feel free to ask it in the chat or the Q&A box at any point throughout the entirety of the presentation. We're also going to be stopping throughout the presentation to allow for some discussion periods with the audience. I will give you a heads up for this to think about your questions, and hopefully we're going to have a really great 90 minutes. So now you guys have learned a little bit about the panel that's here to speak to you today, but we would like to know a little bit more about you. So we're going to drop another poll now and ask a little bit about who's in attendance today. I see some people putting their information in the chat, which is also awesome. And then we have a poll up here to find out who it is that we're speaking to, which can also help us to gauge our conversation. Also, everybody loves a good poll, let's be honest. All right, 86%. Come on, guys, we can do this. Excellent. So it looks like we have a very strong percentage of transplant recipients with us today. Welcome to everybody. Glad that everybody is able to join us. We have a couple of living donors, some family caregivers, some clinicians, and some people who are other. So that is great. We're happy to have everybody with us today. Okay, so we're going to kick off our questions, I think, as long as our panel's ready. Thumbs up from our panel. Is everybody prepared? Excellent. Everybody? Great. So we're going to start with some targeted questions, but of course, as we've already discussed with the panel, everybody is welcome to answer these questions because everybody has been brought here for their own expertise. So we're really, really looking for everyone to weigh in with their input. So we're going to start with a really big one. There's been a lot of talk surrounding the pandemic about how to communicate with our family members, our friends, our children's friends, their family members, our children's school, etc., about how to communicate about concerns and limitations. So we're going to point this question to start actually to you, Susan. If you have any, if you have any input on suggestions that you could provide to people on how to start these conversations.
So I think the most important thing is people have to really think through kind of what do I want, right? And what does my kind of bubble want, or the people that are closest to me want. And I think in some ways, if we can try to take a perspective, I've been sort of trying to encourage in my family people to look at, this is like a whole new Christmas. This is going to be a COVID Christmas, and that gives us permission to do whatever the heck we want with it, right? Within public health guidelines. So, and I've been talking, I did a thing yesterday for a patient education group at our hospital and talked about this. And I said, this is your year. If you want to order in Chinese and watch movies from the 1940s, this is your year to do that. I think it's really to think about kind of what you want to do. And I also think that people should feel free to not have to do a whole lot of explaining. It's kind of like, I've got a transplant, or this transplant in my family, or, we've done the risk assessment, or in some areas, public health has already said, you should, so we're following that. Then you can do other things sort of on top of that. So I know some people who are, I know one of my patients in Toronto, her family are close by. So they're each going to do one of the courses, and normally they would kind of bring it all to grandma's house. But this year they're each going to do one of the courses and leave it on everybody else's porch. And then at dinner time, they're going to do it on Zoom. And you can get on Zoom free for an hour. So they're going to have dinner on Zoom, but everybody eating the food that everybody's prepared. I said, that sounded lovely to me. A friend of mine then thought that we should do that. And I said, no, this is my year to do whatever the heck I want. And I think I'm going to do the Chinese. Actually, I think I'm going to do shortbread and champagne for Christmas Day. But, it's really to think about what's going to make you happy. And then I wouldn't get into it more than that, because at the end of the day, you don't owe anybody an explanation. You're following public health guidelines, and as one of the ICU nurses said to me yesterday in the coffee lineup, you can't fix stupid. So, if you've got people who are trying to talk you out of it all, like, you just can't fix that. So I would try to keep the communication limited. This is what we're doing. Everybody is going to have a very special COVID Christmas or COVID Kwanzaa or COVID Hanukkah or whatever it is. And then let's try to connect in some other way. The other thing I read about that I found quite moving personally, I'm somebody who likes a little bit of ritual. And I read about a family posted about how they started a ritual that her mother had like 20 years ago. And they celebrate Christmas, and they would light, before dinner, they would light candles for the people that weren't there. And then everybody would say something nice about them, about, like, I wish that, Aunt, Mary was here, but she can't come from BC this year, or, we really miss Uncle Joe who died this year. And so, and that what's happened is that now these three kids in the family have all got their own families, and their candles kind of burning across Canada around all of the people, both alive and who've passed on, who people are remembering. I thought that sounded really beautiful to me, so maybe I'll do that with my shortbread and champagne.
There you go. I'm muted, guys. Shortbread, champagne, and candles, like Chelsea said in the chat, is the new favorite Christmas combo. Does anybody from the panel have anything to add to that? No, I think, Susan, you did a great job. Oh, Laurence.
Yes, something you said, Susan, about kind of not explaining yourself too much, but sometimes it can be quite confronting to receive these demands. But sometimes asking yourself what's behind these demands. They don't really want me there on the 24th. What they want is to feel loved and feel heard and feel connected. So there is the request, that very precise request, but then there's a need behind it, and trying to assess what the need behind it is maybe a good way to not create kind of confrontation. Recognizing the need of your family or your loved one can be a good way to kind of de-escalate the confrontation. And I know you would like to see me, I know you would like to connect, but let's find another way to meet that need. So not seeing it at face value of, you just want me there on the 24th. It's more, you have a need, I will acknowledge it. And it's a valid need. So that can also be a way to de-escalate the tension.
Excellent point. I really like that. It really is important to assess the motivation behind some of the concerns and the comments, right? And what are the emotions behind that? So I'm just going to turn the ball around a little bit and put a question out to Larry and Joanna. You guys can fight to the death about who gets to answer it first. And the question is, have you, up until this point, we know 2020 has essentially been 16 years long. So have you faced any difficulties with family members about concerns and limitations, or have you had any complications about discussing your limitations or your choices with family members or friends? This doesn't have to be just necessarily surrounding the holidays, but we know that the holidays leads sort of this additional level of emotion, right, behind the questions. But have you had any difficulties over the year? Is this something that has been an issue for you?
So I can start off.
Wins.
I was unmuted first. So I think for myself, because I'm a parent and there's already this culture with parenting that you get judged, you don't do this with your kids properly, you don't do that. And then when you add into the fact that you are the parent of a transplant child, you have that extra layer of judgment from people. Well, you're being too paranoid, or you're being too lenient, you're letting your kids to take too many risks, that sort of thing. So I think we're right from the beginning of when your child has a transplant, you're already sort of working through that communication issue. And we've always taken the approach, like, we gave Riley the second chance at life by agreeing to a transplant so she could live life. So we always would, weigh the risk against the benefits of anything that she's done in life. And it's been the same thing with COVID. We're always, looking at benefits and risks. And I think our families knew right from the start with transplant. If I'm saying to you, no, you can't, she can't do this or whatever, I've already done the research. I have the data. I am going to be able to present my case. Not that I need to justify myself, but they know I know what I'm talking about because I've already researched it to death. So it's been the same thing with COVID. Nobody has really given us a hard time about any decisions that we've made because they know that we're doing what's in her best interest and what's going to keep her safe. So we haven't really had a lot of difficulty. I do have one parent that leans towards the conspiracy theory side of things. Um, I don't put up with that. Like, if that's what you want to believe, I'm not going to change your mind. I'm not going to argue with you. This is my child and my life, and I have to make the best decisions. So I think for the most part, everybody's respected that within the family. Within my friend group, um, most of those people too, they respect that we have to make the best decision for our child. We've had situations where, like, my friend said, does anybody want to go do this with me? And I said, well, yeah, I'll do that if you're okay that while we're driving there, we wear masks in the car. And they're like, oh, yeah, no problem. So I think right from um, the time of transplant, we've made sure that we surround ourselves with people who are going to understand the situation we're dealing with. They have our best interest at heart. And so then when it comes to communicating what we are and aren't going to do during COVID, they're all very understanding of that. I mean, you're still going to run into the people in the community that, like, we've had the freedom rallies around here, but that is their issue. They have to deal with it. I'm still going to make the best decisions for my family.
Excellent. Great answer, Joanna. Very nice. And Larry, do you have anything to add?
Well, Joanne really said a lot of it. I think as a transplant recipient, as soon as I had my transplant and was immunocompromised, my close friends and family were taught, whether they wanted to be taught or not, just what that meant to me. And then when the pandemic hit, that was really sort of reiterated. It's not that I tried to have them understand that it wasn't that I was trying to be selfish. It was just what I need to stay safe. So I haven't had a lot of problems in talking with family and friends about that. It's certainly going to make things like Christmas look different. The last few Christmases, our dinner table has been 22 to 24 people. This year, that's not going to happen. There's going to be the 6 of us in our little bubble, and that's it. I think the hardest challenge is about trying to keep the fun in it, and hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I haven't found it difficult. The only times, I guess, that I've had to reach out, and that was really as a grandfather, was to a school teacher and to a soccer coach, and just to remind them that there are other people in the world than those with perfect health, and what that means to us. Yeah, I think that's my thoughts on that.
Excellent. We've got a lot of chat going on in the chat box. So just a reminder to everybody, if you do want to participate in this conversation, or you do have questions that you'd like asked to the panel about any of these topics, do please put them in the chat, and Chelsea will be helping to moderate that. Alessandro.
Yeah, I saw that there was a question from Tisa, if that's right, at the bottom, just about feeling lonely. And what I've noticed for myself is I've reached out to a lot of friends to have little conversations. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who I haven't talked to in 5 years. I worked overseas with him. He's an American man, and yeah, we lived together in Colombia, the country Colombia, and I haven't talked to him on the phone in probably 5 years. And we sent a little message back and forth, and he just said to me, "Hey, like let's chat on Wednesday night." We set up a time to have a Zoom call, and I don't think that was necessarily like explicitly related to COVID, but I think that certainly has arisen as a good time to reach out and to chat. And I've done the same thing myself. I think sometimes we can be hesitant to want other people to reach out to us all the time and say, you know, how come no one's engaging me, or I feel lonely? But sometimes we just have to take that risk and think of people who we've really liked and had really nice connections with, and just reach out to them and say, hey, you know, maybe it just starts with a couple text messages or a funny post, or it's not something serious, but then you can see if you want to have a chat. This weekend, I'm going to do like a couple Zoom with my wife and another couple on Saturday night. We're just going to have a beer and have a little Zoom chat together. And, you know, I've done that lots. Sometimes I'm the initiator. I just reach out to friends, old friends that I think I'd like to talk to, and just say, hey, how's it going? How are you doing? And it can lead to a conversation or not, but even sometimes just a little back and forth just gives you a nice perk in your day. And so we have to be, yeah, just not afraid to kind of reach out to some people when we want to have a little bit of contact, and not feel like that's an imposition on anyone, especially if it's a small, like a subtle text message or things like that.
Laurence, you had your hand up?
Yes, to jump on that conversation and also chime into what Larry said about keeping it fun. A mantra I've had when I felt alone, or when people around me felt alone, was that we're all facing the same storm in different boats, reminding ourselves that we're all in this together. Some people may not realize there's a storm, but we are all in the same storm in very different boats, and that kind of mantra really helped me. And on the other side, about having smaller groups and seeming like it's less fun, I found that a perspective shift in terms of you're deepening one-on-one links rather than celebrating community makes it kind of having that perspective shift between deepening one-on-one links versus building memories all together can be interesting in seeing this. So it's less laughing and playing the guitar all family together, but there's more occasions to deepen a link while we're going through a very difficult time all together. So going through big challenges really strengthens relationships. So that's a great occasion to strengthen these one-on-one relationships that are important.
Are you saying that your family does some big sing-alongs at Christmas? The guitars come out?
Yeah, it's a bit embarrassing, but it's okay.
Now you can record it on Zoom, and it
you
will
can,
be there forever.
You can broadcast it to the world, you know?
Oh, the world we need to see.
Susan, you wanted to add to the conversation?
Two other things that I know people have been doing. One is reaching, like as Alessandra was saying, about reaching out to other people. And we do an exercise with people who are depressed, where you make like circles, like almost like, you know, a planetary system of expanding circles, and then write down on them, just like spend an hour and just try to write down all the names of people who've been in your life at various points. And they're people that are really in the inner circle now. They're people that are kind of, you know, out by Saturn, but used to be really important to you. And so one of my psychologist friends has just taken to starting to either send like little written cards or emails just saying, hi, you know, with the extra time I have because of COVID, I've been thinking about the people that were important in my life, and you were one of them, and, you know, I hope we can connect. And she said as a result of that, she lives alone, that she's gotten a lot of mail-in contacts back. So and some of those relationships are kind of being rekindled. So that's been something that's been nice. The other thing, another friend of mine who lives alone did was set up some COVID buddies. So people that you just agreed that you'd check in with, even maybe only for like a couple of minutes, or might send a text back and forth each day of just how you doing. And you know, the kind of thought was that as long as all four of you weren't in tears, it was okay. You know, and usually if there are 3 or 4 people, there's at least somebody who's kind of okay today. And potentially also doing things like, so I'm in love with memes. So I get the little cartoons or the memes off of, Facebook, the internet, and I just shoot them out to different people. I know what kind of sense of humor they have and appeals to them. And it's just a tiny little shot of pleasure. And really the scientific evidence shows that that's when we run into trouble is when we don't get any tiny shots of pleasure. And Alessandra's point is really good too. Often we expect other people to reach out to us if we can kind of get the ball rolling, it helps.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
wanted to.
I was just going to read out something from the chat, but Alessandra, you go first.
I just wanted to echo one thing that Susan's mentioning about the kind of planetary system is that what was so nice about talking to my friend Dan is that my COVID world has become very small. It's my house and it's blocks around my house. And what was so great about talking with Dan is that he lives right now in Huntsville, Alabama, which is somewhere that I've never been. And the reality is very different. So talking to him versus talking to somebody who I know inside of Edmonton or my same blocks kind of allowed me to be outside of my little world. And I could hear, like I was asking him, I've never been to that area of the United States. I was kind of asking him what that city's like and what's it like living there. And so I kind of felt like I was transported out of my small circle. So in that kind of planetary idea of connecting with someone from my past, but also kind of connecting to a different geographical location was really nice. My head went to that space for a while and not just my little area.
Yeah, I think that's actually a super valid point. I've reconnected with a couple of past colleagues that are actually in Europe, and we communicated at the beginning of the pandemic because it was so much worse over there. They sent a lot of warnings this way, but it was people I hadn't spoken to in years, and it was very similar for me, Alessandra. It was nice to speak to people who are in Italy or who are in Germany that I hadn't spoken to in a while. So it was kind of like seeing the positive and a negative, right? And it's like an excuse to rekindle some relationships to sort of battle that situational isolation that, as Laurence mentioned, that everybody's in this same storm. So for those of us who are not transplant recipients or who are not dealing with an immune compromised state, we're still dealing with some forms of isolation as well, which has been a learning experience, I think, for everybody. In the chat, we have a really interesting comment from Carol. So Carol, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to read it out because I think it's just excellent. She says her June goal was to reach out to 2 or 3 people a day that I hadn't talked to in a while and have a phone chat, not a text, not an email, but an actual on the phone conversation. She says it went really well and a lot of people appreciated it. So this is another thing maybe we can talk about ways to communicate with people. Like, is COVID the way to bring back the written word? Is everyone going to get 1,000 Christmas cards this year because we can't communicate in person? So maybe a good opportunity to utilize those other forms of communication that somehow the phone has become antiquated right after the letter. But maybe this is a good time to reach out that way and talk to people with new forms of communication. On the communication topic, Alessandra, I'm going to come back to you. We're going to go back a little bit to the opinions of family and friends. And I'm going to ask you, do you feel that the opinion of, maybe family is not a great example because, like Joanna mentioned, a lot of family is has been very involved sort of throughout the process of a transplant or a recipient's existence since the event. But maybe friends is a really good one. Do you feel like the opinion of the general public has been altered by the use of social media?
Yeah, I think just to kind of provide a broader context of that, I think what's important to know is that more people all over the world are using social media than they ever have before. And so this is including all age demographics in pretty much all countries. Research is showing that it's increasing all over the world. And research is also showing that people, at least this was a Pew study that was done in the United States, that shows people don't really understand how that social media works sometimes. And the specific case was that people don't know that Facebook tracks your information, carries your information, and shows you certain things based on your activity online. And so if you have a pattern of doing certain things or looking for certain things or searching for certain things, you will see more of that and you will consistently see more of that. And so that can start shaping your online world about what you see in a repeated fashion. And a good example I can give of this is I recently read a book, and I'd be happy in the chat to share what book it was, about kind of dark corners of the internet, let's say, where there's some hate speech and things like that. It's a very interesting study by a woman, our book, sorry, by a woman in the United States from New York. And when I was reading the book, I was searching, it's part of my job. So I was searching for some of the websites that she was talking about. And so some of these are some, dark web websites, things like that. And when I went, so this was on Google, I was searching for these web pages. When I went back to Facebook 2 days later, all of the advertisements and the group suggestions had changed. And I saw group suggestions that I'd never had seen before. And if I was approaching these sites not from the way that I was, which was trying to understand them and investigate them, but if I had, let's say a more emotional connection to them, I could have very well joined some of these groups or found myself kind of following down this chain of being a part of them. And so it's very important to increase education about why those things are going on or how people are exposed to those kinds of information. And again, broadly, what we know from social media is that there's a lot of misinformation out there. We know there's a lot of misinformation out there around vaccines, around everyday kinds of things that people can do to stay healthy. Something that we noticed and we studied at our institute was the idea of immune boosting, which we saw a lot of. We've studied it on Google searches and Instagram. So this is the idea that you can somehow make your immune system super good by doing certain things on a daily basis, which there's very little scientific evidence for. And that there's concerns that people would do this and then not listen to the advice of social distancing or washing your hands all the time or doing the things that people really know are great for protecting yourself in these situations. We also know that the way that we process information is that we are processing information through ourselves. So we're processing information through understandings that we already have or through things that we want to believe. And when you already believe something, it becomes very difficult to change that opinion. That is kind of locked in. And so we have natural biases inside of us that wants to avoid information that contradicts our opinion. So if we think, for example, it's really important to take a certain amount of vitamin D every day, you just believe that, it becomes, you start to avoid information that questions whether or not that's actually true. And you also look for information that confirms that that's true. That's called the confirmation bias. So you start Googling like things that will help reinforce those ideas that you have. And so while the biases are at play and we're not really sure how the media is working and there's a lot of misinformation out there, I think people can just be exposed and influenced in ways that they don't really know. And that can cause some divisions in family members because, you can have people that are very close to you holding some views which you don't think are right, or which might even be dangerous or contradictory to what public health officials are saying or what you need to have done, or even just dangerous ideas that you think are kind of, Joanna mentioned earlier, maybe conspiracy of nature. And it's difficult there's no simple solution of how you can engage some of those topics, how you can just tackle them or confront them. But it's really good to ask people why they are so interested in holding that belief and what actions they want to take based on it. A great one about masks is that there's a narrative that you wear a mask to protect yourself. The science actually is not great on whether or not masks protect you, but what masks could do a very good job of is protecting other people when you're sick. This is a very common thing in Asia. When people have the flu in Asia, they wear a mask all the time on public transit. This is not because they think they're going to get sicker from other people. It's to help protect other people. So it's an idea of being around other people and protecting other people by wearing a mask on yourself. And the idea is that if everyone wears one, that we're transmitting less, right? Even if you're not necessarily protecting yourself. So when people start to get into the politicized idea of masks, you just say, hey, this is about just showing basic respect for other people. It's not about someone trying to force you to do something. It's just a nice thing. And it can be a very courteous, simple thing that you can do to help other people and help other people feel comfortable, and you can ask, as I think Joanna mentioned too, you can just say, hey, this would, as opposed to saying, let's argue about whether or not it's right. Let's just say, hey, this makes me feel comfortable. It makes me feel uncomfortable when you're doing this, and it really would make me feel comfortable if you would wear a mask. You can debate later on whether or not it's a scheme that's devised by politicians to do something. But in this context, in my house or in my car, or when we get together, let's just respect one another. This makes me feel comfortable. And can you help me feel comfortable, please? Because I want to hang out with you. That might be a good way to kind of navigate some of those kind of treacherous things. And broadly, which is a little bit more unrelated to this, is it's good to think about we are exposed through social media to just so much information that I don't think we really understand how we're being affected by that. If you can wake up and see thousands of messages, imaging, data, stories. I mean, you can go online tomorrow and read all kinds of information about a country you didn't know existed 2 days before, and you can see images of it. So you're just bombarded with information, and you can ask people, do you need to know that information for actions? Like, why are you kind of processing that information? Do you need to process all that information all the time? And so you can say, oh, you have this idea. That's an interesting idea that you have, but how does that change anything? You know, let's say that someone goes deep into Pentagon conspiracies and things like that. You just say, okay, well, those are fun things to think about, but how does that affect your daily life today? Like, is it going to change the way that you make your lunch? Is it going to change the way that you do exercise or hang out with someone? And just say, I'm just not really interested in discussing that with you. It's just not a topic that I'm interested in. What I am interested in is like what happened last night on the news, or did you see that sports game, or have you read this new book that I've read? And try to bring discussions back to things that are real, that are relatable, that actually affect actions that you're going to take. So someone says, oh, I'm decided to start jogging. You say, oh, have you tried these shoes? I got these new shoes, or there's this cool band you can put on your wrist or whatever, as opposed to going down that chain of kind of misinformation cascades.
Yes, definitely. Laurence, I'm going to toss this to you in 1 second, but first I think we're going to throw up a poll for the audience that has to do with social media use. Chelsea, is that correct? There we go. So how many social media accounts do you regularly use? %. Come on, guys, I have faith in you. Everyone wants to get more than 80 on the test. 89, we're almost there. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. All right. So it looks like the large majority are sitting at 2. We have 39% use 2 social media accounts or platforms. 27% of us use more than 2, and 24% use 1, with only 9% using 0, which is very interesting. So although we are very happy that we have social media, since 51% of our attendees today learned about our event through social media, of course there are positives. We also know that there's a lot of negatives that are associated, like Alessandra mentioned, with the amount of information, the way that information is filtered. And this has really brought about a lot of issues surrounding the pandemic, as noted by the fact that Oxford Dictionary has considered using the term doom scrolling as a new word. So 2020 has brought about a whole set of new words, too many new words, in fact, for them to pick the normal amount that they use. So pandemic-inspired language, Alessandra, has been a big topic of discussion. So I'm just going to ask Laurence if she could talk to us about doom scrolling and what doom scrolling is and what it can do to your mental health without you even realizing it.
Yeah, I think that's something important to understand about doom scrolling, is that currently we're in a situation with a lot of uncertainty, and our brain is meant to detect threats, and uncertainty is a threat. And since we don't have a lot of ways to have certainty, scrolling and refreshing and going to other sources is a kind of automatic way that our behavior will make us look for more certainty, sorry. So by trying to gather as much information possible, we're kind of trying to reduce uncertainty. But as we know, it sometimes just increases it because there's just so many conflicting sources and we don't have the answers yet. Either the government has not taken their decision, or the jury is still out on a vaccine, or so we don't have all of the answers, and we kind of think that we're going to be able to find them to reduce that perceived threat, but it's really problematic. Also, I like something that Alessandro talked about in terms of, is that information bringing you towards action? And that's a good way to kind of stop doom scrolling, because it has, there are a lot, time and time again, studies have shown that spending more than a certain amount of time on social media is bad for your mental health, for your even daily productivity, for a bunch of stuff. So if the information you're gathering is not helping you take decisions, you may be being doom scrolling at the moment. So it's sometimes hard to even detect, am I just keeping myself updated because I need to be updated about the news and how things are evolving? And when you're detecting that moment when you're going from I'm gathering information to, well, I'm doom scrolling right now. So seeing, is that information I'm seeking going to help me make decisions, or am I fueling the fire of anxiety? So having that little break of looking at yourself and evaluating yourself at that moment can be a good way to detect that threshold of, am I starting to doom scroll?
Joanna and Larry, do either of you have anything to add about doom scrolling? Do you find that this is something that you participate in, that you've caught yourself doing? Do you feel, so I'm not a transplant recipient, nor am I a transplant family member, but I am a scientist. And I can tell you that being a scientist or a clinician for the last year has also been quite dramatically stressful when it comes to doom scrolling, because you're consistently looking at the attitude of people who are not versed in what you do for a living, who are making statements or opinions, and that personally I have found it to be quite stressful. But Joanna or Larry, have you had any issues on social media, or found yourself getting wound up into things on social media and then kind of realizing, like, wait, does this really affect me, or is this affecting me negatively?
I would
Joanna, ladies first.
I would say, well, one of the things that I would say that I've used at times as a coping method is when I find that I am repetitively scrolling, I will actually delete social media apps off my phone so that I can't scroll for a while. And it might just be for an evening or whatever, but I'll just delete it off. And then I don't have that inclination to keep going back and looking. It is very hard. I live in a small community, and it's supposed to be the friendly city is our tag. And when you see people not really caring about the people that live in our community, and organizing these rallies and fighting about masks, and it can get really discouraging. So I just need to remind myself there is actually more people in our community that are supportive, and just take a step back from it.
Awesome. Larry?
Yes, and I try not to get caught up in that. There's a couple of trusted news sources that I look at in the morning that I know are fact-based, and I have a great deal of trust with them. Other things during the day, because I try to be more of an upbeat person, I like to look for things that are entertaining and have good social meaning. Alessandro made the point about some of the algorithms. When you click on a link and you go somewhere, and the next thing you've got ads and other links similar coming into your news feed. So I try to avoid that. I like to have things coming into my news feed that are upbeat and are going to make me feel better.
Excellent. So actually, Larry brought up a really good point about the news, like the actual mainstream media, not social media. And we do have a couple of questions comments on the chat about the news. But I think before we do that, Chelsea's going to launch another poll for us. Chelsea, are you going to reappear and poll launch for us?
If I have to.
Oh,
Here we go.
She has lights on her chair now. Very festive. All right. Is social media good for learning new information about topics, or just for entertainment? This is our first one. 80%, guys. You can do this. Very adamant about my percentages. Excellent. 79% of our audience thinks it's good for both learning and entertainment. 18% just entertainment, and 1% for just learning. And just to sort of go over some of the things that are in the chat, a couple of people are saying that even watching the mainstream media doesn't help the mental health too much, and that that they're new to Facebook, or that they were glued to the news because of COVID, and that their attendance to the news has really changed. And I think this raises a really good point for the people on the panel. Where do you go for good information? We just talked about social media. It's not peer reviewed. It's not edited. Anybody can have an opinion. We all know that our news channels are somewhat slanted as well, depending on political affiliation, unfortunately. So are there any resources or good places or suggestions for people to go to get good news, or coping mechanisms to filter their news, perhaps, is a good way to do it, or check up on their sources? Does anybody have any recommendations for that? Anybody? Alessandra.
There's a really good article that I'd be happy to share just about information noise. And this goes back to what Laurence was mentioning as well. And I mentioned earlier just about actions. The classic case you can see is almost every week there's a new study that tells you whether eggs are good for you or not. So are they good for you? Are they bad for you? Or are they not? So, you read this and you say, oh, I shouldn't eat eggs, or I should eat eggs. Now I shouldn't eat eggs, etc. Well, what do we know is good for nutrition? We know it's good to eat lots of fruits and vegetables and not eat a lot of junk food. All the little bits about there are just kind of noise. Like you shouldn't be too swayed. Our research director has a great point, which just says there's never been one study that changes everything. It takes a long time for different scientific knowledge to come out, which is actually strong. So they'll do one study that's based on, on mice. There's actually a Twitter account called Justin Mice, which retweets every study that claims something that's only at a mouse study, because we know from science, how often do those actually lead to treatments? It's so rare. So you just take it with a grain of salt. There's scientists who are doing something interesting. What is the action that affects me? Very likely nothing, and very likely nothing for a long time. There's a brand new cure for cancer. There's not a brand new cure for cancer that we didn't know on Friday that all of a sudden on Saturday, they're slow developments. It doesn't mean you can't monitor some of the news that people are doing and trying things, but it will take time for those things to be solidified. So just being aware of the idea of general media noise that's out there in terms of actions that you can take, I think is really helpful. What you're reading is news about small developments, even from sources, like the CBC or National Post or mainstream media that cover these topics. They will cover what science is evolving and what new things are evolving, but that can change 2 weeks from now, or that can change a month from now, and the story will shift. So if you do want to track the stories, just keep that in mind. Not one study is going to change the understanding of a topic. It's going to take a while for that to come through. And don't read too much into it. Don't read the study as, oh, any study that comes out immediately is fact. Consensus will build over time. And lastly, on a site like Twitter anyway, there's some real experts out there who are very niche, who know a lot about particular things. And you can follow them for really good factual evidence as it comes from them. You have to be very careful of who they are. It really is nice to see an affiliation with an academic science resource, for example, if they're based at a university that in Canada, and they tweet out a lot of studies and they talk about problems in studies or things that are good about studies or not good about studies. That's a nice way to follow some science, I think.
Excellent. Laurence?
Yeah, I have 2 points that kind of bounce off what Alessandro just said. I think that there's no one news source. I wouldn't recommend one in particular, but I would recommend maybe 2 processes. The first one is looking at fact-checking websites. So there are some specialized fact-checking websites, and more social media is also adding fact-checking information in their interfaces. So even if you don't see any fact-checking, always remember that it's a job you may have to do. And the second one is a lot about scientific literacy. Sometimes we read articles like about eggs that will give you a heart attack or no, you never know. But remembering that, these are one after the other, but also being able to read through, having the vocabulary that's around science. And if you look at the article rather than the clickbait link, oh, 100 participants. Does that really mean I should change my behavior? So having that scientific literacy helps. Not everybody has it, but it's something that can be developed, and there's a lot of resources to develop scientific literacy. So yeah, these are, oh, somebody just posted in the chat a link to a scientific literacy resource. But that can be a way to kind of help you be your own fact checker and kind of calm down the alert of seeing a news kind of catastrophizing news story.
Awesome. Quick, Alessandro, and then we're going to switch gears just a little bit. So one.
Sure, yeah, just what Laurence was saying, I totally agree. Like if you really want to dig into scientific studies, maybe do some research as to what a random control trial is. What's the difference between a random control trial and an observational study? What's a good size? What's a good population size for a study? Learn some of that, and then you can have a better idea of how to understand some of the studies. The same thing would apply to cars. You want to know what's a good car? Maybe figure out what is a car, what is torque, what are pistons, what is the engine? If you don't want to know that, just forget about it. Just ignore it. But if you do want to really know cars, take some time to actually figure out how people are talking about cars, like electric cars, which are coming out now and they're exciting.
All right. So we're going to shift gears a little bit away from social media communication style questions, and we're going to transition a little bit into coping mechanisms and coping style questions. So we did touch on this a little bit at the beginning, but we're just going to come back to it now. So I'd like to sort of start actually with Joanna and Larry again and say, what have been some of your proven coping mechanisms and coping methods to help mediate concerns over 2020? So those can be anything from mediating, like you mentioned, deleting your social media apps. That's a coping mechanism, but it could be anything. Is there any sort of secret tips you have to offer us? Larry and Joanna. I know you've got something in there.
I'm going to let you go first, Larry.
Oh, okay. Am I allowed to say joining wine clubs? I'm getting another delivery today. Yeah, all joking aside, I think as you're trapped, for lack of a better word, inside your walls at home, you have to try to find things that you can do that are uplifting. And I've always found that music is uplifting. There's a number of groups and organizations that are now posting streaming concerts, that sort of thing. There are jazz clubs in Vancouver who will stream concerts for free. They'll ask for a donation, but you can still watch them for free if you want. My wife and I, because of our Scottish roots, we're looking forward to watching a Scottish Ceilidh on Monday night. That comes through one of the Scottish groups that we subscribe to. Anybody that doesn't know what a Ceilidh is, it's basically Celtic music and dance. So it never fails to get your toes tapping, and certainly manages to uplift your spirits. I think Christmas traditions, specifically related to Christmas, we'll definitely be watching National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation with a nice mug of mulled wine in hand to get some laughs. I think texting friends, phoning friends, Zooming with friends. We have friends that live in California who are having their own struggles with COVID, and we'll be doing a Zoom cocktail hour with them, which will be really nice. And get outside. You can't stay inside your own walls too much. I think even if it's a crummy day, to get outside for a little while in the fresh air is always kind of uplifts my spirits anyway. Joanna.
So I'd say, through the pandemic, my coping methods have kind of evolved. I mean, the beginning, we don't have like we didn't have a lot of information. So you're basically afraid to walk out your door or touch anything without sanitizing and whatever. So that kind of brought me back to transplant, because when you first come home with a little baby and you're afraid they're going to get germs and you got to feel like you're in control, what can control? So for me, at the beginning of the pandemic, that was making sure that I could get things delivered to my house. So I'm a horrible sleeper. So I wake up in the middle of the night and it's checking Instacart to see if I can get a grocery delivery time of when I want my groceries delivered. Or, making sure that I'm sanitizing when I go check the mail and come back in the house. Do I sanitize my hands? I'm wiping down my groceries. And, as we kind of progressed and got more information about COVID, we realized, okay, we don't need to be that extreme. We can loosen up a bit, and it's just going with the flow, and letting go of a bit of that control. And I'm also, I'm not great for asking for help. And then I had my girlfriends reaching out to me and they're like, we're going to the grocery store, what do you need me to pick you up when we go? And learning to accept that help from people was another way of being able to deal with it. And then, as summer went on in our community, the numbers have been pretty low. We're in a smaller town. So, getting outside, we already have our backyard set up. Like, we've got a pool and we've got a hot tub and we've got green space, nature trails down the road from us. So taking advantage, taking the dog for a walk. My son fishes a lot. My in-laws have a trailer on Lake Erie, so we felt comfortable there being careful, and we're outside hanging out there a lot. And just things like, this summer was supposed to be the Canadian Transplant Games in Winnipeg, and we had already bought our plane tickets. So we had to figure out, well, we know we can't do this. There's no point in crying about it. This is it. But what are we going to do instead for summer vacation that's safe? So we rented a cottage that we knew was very clean and away from too many people. So I think it's just kind of taking it a day at a time and learning to adapt to the current situation. Now things are kind of ramping up again with the COVID numbers. So maybe we have to lock down a little bit more again. But, what are we going to do through the winter? Down the street, there's usually an outdoor rink. There's a hill across the street we can toboggan, just those sort of things, coming up with some new ideas and enjoying the slower life actually feels pretty good.
All right. Just a reminder before we move on to the next, I think Laurence, maybe you had something to add there. You were nodding your head, but nope. Just a reminder to the audience, if you do have any questions for the panel or any topics you'd like to touch on, we're coming up at about 25 minutes left in our webinar. So this would be a really great time to pop those questions into our chat box or into the Q&A box so that we can make sure that we touch on those before the end of our webinar today with our panel. So just a reminder to everybody, the chat box is at the bottom of the Zoom screen if you do want to pop on there and ask any questions for anybody. All right, I'm going to change topics a little bit, still in the coping mechanisms, but I'm going to reach out to Susan and say, has this been a point of concern within your practice or with patients or with your colleagues about being able to provide additional resources or coping mechanisms because of the specificities that are related to COVID this year? You're muted, Susan.
There are a whole lot of resources that are new and are available now because of COVID. And I'd be happy to send those along to you guys if you want to post them. But the federal government has put money into a wellness resource that has a lot of tools online. The people in Ontario, there's the Connects group. There are many of the online particularly meditation programs like Calm and Headspace. There's something called 10% Happier. They all have free coronavirus kind of, I love the 10% Happier call. There's the coronavirus survival guide. So those are available, which are helpful. I don't know whether all the this is across Canada, but many of them have something called Big White Wall, which is a peer support program that initially started in the UK and then now is sort of spreading across Canada. They've just changed their name to Together All. So like the word together and then all, but if you put in Big White Wall, you get it. And they have sort of peer support activities. They've got creative tools, so you can also make art online, and it's all kinds of sort of very cool stuff. So I think there are a lot of resources that are becoming available both nationally and then in the individual provinces.
All right. Maybe a positive spin on things. It's brought the awareness about mental health and isolation sort of to the forefront, because as we mentioned, we're now all weathering a bit of the same storm. So maybe some of those resources will be long-standing and help contribute to an overall improvement in some mental health resource availability just because of the pandemic. Just to think on a sort of on a positive note, sucks that we had to get here, but maybe it's brought some things to the forefront that have always been there, and now it's more important to sort of develop these readily available resources for people. So Susan had mentioned if anybody is interested in some of these resources, Chelsea and Sylvain are posting them there in the chat for you guys if anybody's interested in visiting any of these links. Laurence, do you have anything to add about sort of like general stress mechanisms or stress resources that maybe are available, or things that we've maybe learned about society and stress over this pandemic that could be useful to the audience today?
Yeah, I'd like to start by bouncing off something that Joanna said when you said that you're feeling like you were all over again in transplant mode. That brought forward something that's called crisis competence that we're studying more and more in this crisis, when we realize that people who have faced crises in the past have developed skills before and are able to reuse them. So it's not everyone who's faced a crisis who's able to harness this, but knowing that, kind of going back to these mechanisms you've used when you first had your transplant or when you've had other challenges can be a great way to remind yourself that, yes, you have these competencies, and though things may change, that can be a way to kind of go back to what you know you can do. Something that's also quite interesting about stress is, well, we live it every day. We have some of it every day. We have, every time there's something we're stressed about, we will have kind of a stress response. There will be cortisol in our body. But when we're faced with a stressor, it usually goes back quite fast unless we ruminate on it. So if you keep it alive, it will stay alive in your body in terms of hormones. So reminding yourself that, yes, you can have a stressful conversation or kind of go see the news and it stresses you. But if you are able to switch to something else rather than talk for half an hour with your spouse or with your kid about the problem, when it doesn't become useful anymore, then it just feeds your stress hormones and can prevent you from going back to normal. So that's something that's kind of important to remember. Something else also is understanding what is stressful about the situation for you. There's a really easy to remember acronym for stressors in our daily lives. So stress drives you nuts, NUTS. N is for novelty, U is for uncertainty, T is for threat to the ego. So if you feel like your competence or your value is kind of put in question. And finally, the S is sense of control. So if you look at what's stressing you out in these terms, you can find more targeted solutions that will touch what is affecting you. So yes, there's a stressor outside, but if for me, it's the fact that it's new, I can get back to, okay, yeah, well, I remember when there was the H1N1 pandemic, what did I do at that point, and kind of see the similarities and make it feel less new. So having something that's targeted at what touches you is really important. Also remembering that there's no one size fits all, in terms of stress management. Meditation can be great, but it doesn't work instantly for everyone. Exercise is great, but it's not possible for everyone all the time. So there's just a very wide toolkit, and don't feel like you have to only use one tool. More is better often, and having a dynamic way of looking at what could be useful at this moment is also very useful.
Awesome. I'm going to pass the ball back to Larry. He had made mention in his introduction about conversation groups, some that were mediated through CDTRP, but there's other ones out there too. And how have those been useful to you over the pandemic?
Yes, I think, any of you who are not involved in transplant groups, and there are many of them, and if you have the time to, I would certainly encourage it. Certainly reach out to the CDTRP. They've been a great resource for me. Not only a way to gain a fantastic education, but also the camaraderie that you have with other participants. Whether you're participating in something like this, whether you're interested in getting some training on being a patient family partner, which can lead to other projects. I find that those are very helpful to me. I recently had a job change, and I decided that when I got a new job, I would really only like to work 3 days a week, because I wanted to spend my other couple of days doing things such as this, which are near and dear to my heart. Not everyone is able to do that, but certainly anything along those lines. The Canadian Transplant Association, local provincial organizations for transplants, Transplant Research Foundation of BC, all sorts of things that you can get involved in if you want to. And as I say, they're not only a good way to bring knowledge to yourself about what is going on in your specific world, but a great source to make new friends.
We've enjoyed having you, Larry. All right. I think we're going to switch gears just a little bit again. We have about 15 minutes left. So just a reminder to everybody in the chat, if you do have questions, 15 minutes to ask them. But I think to sort of swing things back to more looking forward and staying positive, which we've talked about a little bit over the webinar today, but we really wanted to ask targeted questions to everybody in the audience, as well as everybody on the panel, about how you plan on keeping the excitement for the holidays. So keeping in mind, just coming back to that statement that Laurence made, we're all in the same storm and we're all in a different boat. The reality is here that the holidays are going to be different for everybody. So what are some things that you've thought about, plans that you have, like champagne and shortbread, that you're going to use to sort of keep your excitement surrounding the holidays? Maybe some new routines that you think you might like to start, new opportunities that have been afforded to you because of things you've learned over COVID, like reaching out to people who are maybe far away from you, Zoom dinners, things like that. So what does everybody have planned for the holidays that they're going to use to try to keep that excitement factor? Joanna, we're going to start with you.
So one of our projects this summer was to build a fire pit in our backyard so that we can have some outside activities. So first, I have my Christmas ornament, all my little people with their masks and their hand sanitizer, and that's to, represent 2020. And then I've got you'll see I really like buffalo plaid with my shirt. I've got my warm hat to wear outside with the fire in my buffalo plaid. And then we've got my buffalo plaid bandana for my dog so she can match me. And we've got our marshmallows and our cookies for our s'mores. So I think, this year we're going to hang out and, maybe have a fire. Maybe Santa will show up. Santa shows up at my house at random times. Sometimes it's even in July. So, just, boy, Santa's put on a lot of weight. He's got the hand sanitizer and everything. So I think we're pretty set. We'll find a way to have some fun for Christmas. It's a little bit different. We still are going to spend time with our in-laws. They've been pretty much living the same life as us, so we feel pretty comfortable with them. But just it's going to be a quieter Christmas, and that's okay. But we'll still make some fun.
Awesome. All right, Larry.
Well, I can't top that, and I didn't bring any props. Yeah, I think, you know, my wife and I are old enough that we don't need so much, I guess, Christmas style fun, other than, some traditions that we still like. But it's more about keeping it fun for our grandson. So we're going to try to keep things as normal as we can. We're not going to go mad decorating our place, but we will have some Christmas decorations up and try to make things as fun as we can for him. We talked in a Zoom meeting yesterday about me digging out my mother's shortbread recipe, and I plan on actually making that with my grandson tomorrow. So just small things like that, but to try to keep a Christmas theme to it.
All right, Laurence, how about you?
Yeah.
I mentioned no guitar, so.
Yeah. For me, my quarantine, none of my family is in Montreal, so that makes it hard to kind of travel everywhere. I will not be traveling everywhere, but my quarantine bubbles is a couple of friends. So they are from a Jewish family, and I've never had Hanukkah before. So we are going to exchange tradition. So we're going to have basically sharing our family traditions, because we're becoming a chosen family also. So going through this together has been tough and very brought us together. But sharing tradition is also a way to remember family that we can't see, and also learning about our close ones. So that's how we're going to keep it exciting. There's also going to be a lot of chocolate, a lot of Baileys and coffee, a lot of walking out in the snow. Yeah, so that's how I plan to make Christmas meaningful and fun this year.
I say this every morning, not canceled, Baileys and coffee. Everybody? Alessandra, what are you doing to keep your Christmas exciting? Or your holidays, festivities exciting? Sorry, I should be more open here.
Yeah, it's going to be a very hectic Christmas for us. Christmas is going to be on the back burner because my wife is pregnant with twins. And she is like, yeah, it's a big surprise. And so she is like 8 months, past 8 months. So our twins are going to be born right around, yeah, thank you. Someone's saying congratulations. Right around Christmas time. So that's basically our top priority is, yeah, ushering the little ones in and seeing how that unfolds. That's going to be our major priority. But just to echo some sentiments from everyone else I was out for a bonfire last night in Edmonton down in the River Valley. Spectacular, beautiful night. We had a little fire, cooked a little food. It's so nice. As Larry mentioned too, just getting outside every day, running in the snow feels so nice. It's not just about, being outside is really safe, especially if you're socially distanced with other people or you're outside with your bubble, and it just feels great anytime you can get out. So I'm sure we'll get out a bunch. And then, yeah, just touching in with some old traditions is always nice. My wife always watched the Muppet Christmas. We watch that. Sometimes more reluctantly for me, but we always get into it. And just little things, like a little advent calendar or doing some cooking, as Larry mentioned, is always nice. Making biscotti, or we make biscotti at our place. So making shortbreads, it's really nice to do all stuff like that. So just do what you can, do what you can. Our Christmas is double affected, I guess, 1 by the twins and 2 by COVID. And yeah, just try to enjoy what you can.
Melanie is suggesting all of the naps before the twins arrive. She says to sleep when you can, because that should be a major priority. I don't have kids myself, but I can imagine that is great advice from Mel, mother of 4. Susan, do you have anything other than your champagne and shortbread that you're going to be doing? That's my new thing now. I'm going to use it as much as possible.
My personal, it's funny because I'm a single mom with two kids who are now like in their late teens, but the 26th is mine. This is a good tradition for you, Sandra. So like, as long as they don't burn down the house, that's always been the deal. So I am spending all of the 26th in bed binge watching The Crown on Netflix. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. It's funny, I was talking to my younger daughter about it, and I said, we'll have to figure out what we can do because we're in lockdown right now, and it's hard to know whether we'll be out or not for Christmas. And so she said, well, the one thing we can do is eat. And I said, well, that was true. So we were talking about, making like the family shortbread and that. but then she had this fabulous idea, what she thought was a fabulous idea about going and getting kind of favorite foods from the past. But they were all different grocery stores. And so all I could think of is like, I'm going to have to go into 6 different grocery stores on the 23rd and 24th. That may not be such a good thing to do during COVID. So we're going to have to negotiate on that one a little bit.
All right, Chelsea, with your lights and your Christmas hat, what are your Christmas plans?
Man, I am owning Christmas this year. My husband just brought me some eggnog. But I really like some suggestions in the chat. Barbara suggested creative dance classes. She's taking them through the National Ballet School dance classing online for seniors. I think that's great. Barbara, if you can share the link with the rest of us, that'd be fantastic. Kathleen, I'm stealing this idea. She's hosting a distance craft party to replace the one she normally hosts. She's going to be dropping off a box with a simple craft, baking, and a bottle of bubbly. Good for you, Kathleen. So you have really good suggestions, but I am more of the Susan type. I'm going to be under my blankets and binge watching The Crown on this one. Saving it for now.
Melanie is recommending a board game tournament. And for those of you who don't know, Melanie's family does amazing themed dinners. They do them for every holiday. So Mel, I expect a Christmas themed dinner. You should see their Halloween themed dinner, guys. It's amazing. So lots of opportunities. Really great one in the chat that just popped up for our 40th anniversary when we missed a trip. Andrea planned a treasure hunt, which we did on Zoom. Each person told us 6 items to find, and we had to find them and compete for who returned to Zoom first, which is really hilarious. I think that's great. Mel's talking about her family choir. I know she's dropped by and sung to Chelsea before. They're both in Montreal Christmas.
She has, yeah. I'll be waiting for the van to show up on my doorstep, Mel.
Yeah, absolutely. Me, myself is the same. My parents are out of town. We haven't really decided our plans yet. But definitely baking. I've pulled out all my grandmother's recipes that I haven't made in years because I just haven't had time. And that's the goal for this year. As we discussed, the idea of picking up a 15-pound turkey is fairly overwhelming when there's only 1 or 2 people in the house. So I think instead of spending my time making a turkey this year, I'm going to make more cookies. So that's kind of my plan. We have about 7 minutes left. Does anybody have anything from the panel that they'd like to discuss that we haven't touched on, or from the audience? Are there any more ideas about festivities or even coping mechanisms for the long winter months? I keep looking at the building lines in the grocery store and thinking like that lineup's going to be a lot less fun in February than it was in June. Things like that. Any ideas, maybe Laurence, Susan, for sort of how to cope when the weather outside is frightful, if we will?
Yeah, we have to remember that the pandemic started in the winter too. So we've done that once. Just knowing that we've done that once really often helps, and you can build on what worked last year. So that's something that makes me much easier, knowing that that makes me dread not Christmas, but that makes me dread winter a little bit less. Also, there's just more and more services that have popped up of delivery, and I think Joanna, you said that you had friends suggest to bring you groceries, so that can be a way to team up, and also it's a way to be less isolated. So if you team up with another family and say you're doing the grocery this week and we're doing the grocery the other one, can be a way to reduce the weight, the weight of these daily tasks. So that can be 2 different ways that are winter specific.
All right. Anybody else got anything to add about winter? Maybe Alessandro, since you're over there in Edmonton, or here it's been quite cold. It was 24 degrees in Ontario, and Patricia, who was on our team from Edmonton, let me know it was -18, and that I was a horrible person for mentioning my 25 degrees 2 weeks ago. So since you guys are already sort of in the depths of, pandemic numbers growing there and in the winter, any thoughts from you on sort of winterized mechanisms?
Well, little known fact, there's never not winter in Edmonton, actually. It's a little known fact. It's 12 months of the year full on. No, I'm joking. There's summer for a couple months there in the middle. We did a trivia night a couple weeks back. So there's a lot of things that maybe you think you have to organize or people in your group have to organize, but I don't know a ton of them, but I'm sure out there's things you can sign up to do. So you could be like a random trivia night in your city that's being hosted. So no one has to have the burden of hosting the Zoom and you can just hop into one if you like doing trivia or something like that. And yeah, I guess just like following the weather and bundling up. You know, it's I to echo Larry's sentiment, I always find it's worth it. Even if I went outside and I got blasted by the wind and it was cold, it's better to go out a little bit and get blasted by the wind and even just go around the block, or I've got a nice little walk that I can do to the river valley. You're like, oh, that was terrible, but you feel better. You feel better just going out and getting that walk in. And I really appreciate Edmonton's spirit in that way. Edmontonians get out. They get out in the cold and they just try to make the most of it. And so I think that can apply anywhere.
Awesome. I think that's a really good thing to highlight, actually. I noticed it. So for those of you who don't know me, I live in the city of Guelph, which is just outside of Toronto, a big green space city, pretty active. And we definitely noticed how busy all the trails are and the outside spaces and the parks when COVID started. And it's another one of those sort of see things in a positive light, right? People are getting outside more. People are putting more of an emphasis on some physical activity, you know, within places where it's safe, where you can wear a mask, where you can social distance. And I being from Ottawa originally, so also used to the cold, I agree with you, Alessandro. It's always better to get outside, get some sunlight, get some fresh air, even if it's just walk to get the mail and back. It's nice to see that outside space, even when it's cold. All right, Susan.
I was going to say the other thing, one of my patients has a very great saying. She says every night, she says to herself as she's getting into bed, this is one day closer to this being over. And so I really like that. The other thing I'm sort of have been doing myself, now that I think the vaccine is coming, right, is to kind of pick a date that we think we can kind of work to, so that, you know, by, I think you hear most people, I think they're thinking either by July 1st or September 1st, we should be in a very significantly different position from where we are right now. So I think that really helps too in the kind of countdown that, you know, probably we have less time going forward than we already put in with this, but I know the winter's going to be real hard.
Breaking it into manageable chunks, right? It's like anything. If I tell myself I have to mop all of my floors, I'll never do it. But if I tell myself just to mop the kitchen, it'll get done. So it's the same idea, break it into some manageable chunks for your mental health. Alessandra?
Yeah, just this is totally anecdotal, but a recent change I've made is I don't bring my cell phone into my bedroom anymore. So I charge my phone downstairs in the kitchen. I have to wake up and not look at my phone immediately. I was in a bad habit there of like immediately absorbing information within like 10 seconds of being awake. It's not good. So I've been keeping my phone out of my room and I've really noticed a difference. I'm sleeping better at night because I have to read something that's not my phone before I go to bed. And then there's a big lull in the morning. Sometimes I actually do a bunch of stuff before I even work my way to the phone, you know? So that's been helping me. Phone off.
Awesome. So we're coming up to our 90 minutes. Much like 2020, it was a bit of a time vacuum today. The time flew by for me. I don't know how it was for everybody else. I'd just like to thank, first of all of our attendees for joining us today. Of course, if you have interest in the resources that the CDTRP can provide to you, or you're more interested in becoming involved in research, please feel free to visit our website. Chelsea's going to put it in the chat box there for you, or to visit our partners. I'd like to say a special shout out to Estellas, who helped us to put this webinar on today. Very important to them to have sort of patient and community facing events surrounding these things. So we would really like to thank them. Also, we'd like to thank our fantastic panel. So round of applause for our panel today. Thank you for taking the time out of your own schedules, your own research, your own clinical practice, your own families, to be here today with us and to help to provide conversation and your expertise. Everyone who's here today is involved with the CDTRP or involved with research, and we're really all busy trying to learn more about this situation and sort of make it as positive as possible. And we'd like to really thank you for being here. We know how busy everybody is. And also a special shout out to Chelsea, who was really, really involved in recruiting the panel for today and running the webinar and getting everything put together and making the super awesome video at the beginning. So thank you to her for taking the time to do that. And yeah, that's it, I think, for today. We're going to round up. So happy holidays, happy festivities, Merry Christmas, whatever is your jam. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And the recordings and the chat will be available publicly after the event. So please check back in and feel free to share with your communities. And thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Bye.
Happy holidays.